I will not marry you. I am marrying her instead. A billionaire stunned everyone at his own wedding by leaving his stunning bride at the altar and choosing a barefoot, homeless woman who appeared at the gates of his mansion that very morning. But when the guests learned the truth about who she really was and what had been done to her, no one could hold back their tears. Hello everyone, welcome to our story. Before we jump in, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you in New York, Jamaica, maybe South Africa, or Canada? We'd love to hear from you. Edward Blackwood was 34 years old on the morning of his wedding. He stood in front of the mirror in his massive bedroom, staring at his reflection. Sharp jawline, dark eyes, broad shoulders, crisp white shirt perfectly ironed and hung by his valet the night before. He looked every bit the part, powerful, wealthy, successful, the kind of man the world said should want nothing. Yet, his chest felt hollow. He splashed cold water on his face, telling himself it was just nerves. Normal wedding day jitters. Every man felt this way, right? Drying his face, he moved to the window. His mansion, if you could even call it that, really more like a palace, sat on 2 acres in the city's priciest neighborhood. Below, a team of workers in white uniforms hustled, arranging white flowers, steaming long tablecloths, and setting up a grand rose-covered arch at the far end of the garden. A red carpet ran from the gates to the altar, fit for royalty. 300 guests were expected. Business tycoons, politicians, celebrities, people whose faces dominated the papers. Photographers would capture it all, making sure the world would know Edward Blackwood was married today. Edward watched the scene below, trying to feel something. He thought of Monica. They'd been together 4 years. Stunning, her kind of beauty that made strangers stare. Sharp, poised, knowing exactly what to say in every important room. She never embarrassed him. Always perfectly dressed, perfectly spoken, always exactly what was needed. Edward told himself this was love, or as close as he was ever going to get. He had long decided that real love, the raw, terrifying kind, wasn't for him anymore. He'd given it once, his heart completely open, only to have it destroyed. At least, that's what he believed. Turning from the window, he began to get dressed. Felicia didn't cross his mind. He never let her. Today, he was marrying Monica, and that was that. Meanwhile, down the hall in the largest guest suite, Monica Adams had been awake since 5 a.m. Not from nerves, she never got nervous. That was for people unsure of winning. Monica was always certain. She sat at her wide vanity, silk robe draped elegantly, while a makeup artist worked carefully across her face. 3 other women were present, a hairstylist, a dress stylist steaming her gown in the corner, and her assistant, Ruth, clipboard in hand, ready for any issue. The room smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Monica studied her reflection, thinking how far she had come. She hadn't grown up wealthy, but she wasn't poor either. Her father was an accountant. Her mother, Margaret, had shaped her into who she was. Margaret Adams didn't hand out the usual advice about kindness or love. She taught Monica the world was a competition. Only the smartest won. Beauty was a tool to use wisely. Feelings were costly and often useless. The cleverest woman planned quietly, aimed carefully, and never let emotion interfere. By 16, Monica could walk into a room and instantly know who held power, who craved it, and who was faking. By 18, she knew the life she wanted and had begun plotting it. Then, at university, she noticed Edward Blackwood. She already knew who he was, the Blackwood heir. Quiet, serious, reserved, but with a presence that filled any room. She watched him for weeks before making her move. But before she could, Edward fell for someone else, Felicia. Simple scholarship student Felicia, with worn shoes, second-hand textbooks, and big brown eyes Edward couldn't look away from. Monica's jaw tightened under the brush, the makeup artist whispering, "Please keep still, ma'am." Monica calmed her expression. She realized later the feeling she'd felt watching them, it was rage. Her mother always said rage was just energy waiting to be used. Margaret Adams arrived at 8 a.m., as planned. At 60, she carried herself with unwavering confidence. Silver hair, gray eyes, cream-colored dress, effortless elegance. She moved through the mansion with a quiet smile, watching a plan decades in the making near its end. She entered Monica's suite without knocking again. "You look perfect," Margaret said behind her, examining the reflection. "I know," Monica replied. "Don't cry during the ceremony. Smudges make you look weak." "I won't." Margaret lowered her voice. "Once you sign, it's over. Everything is yours. Nothing and no one can undo it." Monica met her mother's eyes in the mirror, sharing the silent look of two people who had worked toward the same goal for years and were finally at the finish line. "Yes, Mother," Monica said. Margaret nodded and looked out at the garden. Everything was perfect. Everything under control. She was very, very good at control. At the mansion's front gate, a woman sat on the ground. Thin, clothes faded, bare dirty feet, shoes long gone. Hair unkempt, small plastic bag beside her holding all she owned. Her name was Felicia. She was 32, but looked older. The streets aged people fast, stripping softness from their faces. Yet beneath the dust and fatigue, something remained: quiet strength, determination, alive despite everything. She watched the black cars arrive, guests laughing in fine clothes, guards checking names. Her name wasn't on any list, but she had to speak to Edward. For 3 days, she'd been building courage, walking across the city to get here. Her feet were sore, her stomach empty. None of it mattered. Felicia knew something no one else did. Something hidden for 10 years, buried under money, lies, and careful planning. Proof that mattered, and today was the only day it still did. She stood, grabbed her bag, and walked to the gate. "Stop right there," a security guard said, blocking her. Large man, black uniform, expression flat, judging her without a word. "I need to speak with Mr. Blackwood," Felicia said, voice quiet but steady. "Mr. Blackwood is getting married today. He's not available. Can you just pass a message? Tell him someone from Greenfield University is here. It's urgent. He'll want to know." The guard gave her a slow, careful look from head to toe. Then he shook his head. "Ma'am, please step away from the gate." His tone hardened slightly. "Move now, or I'm calling the police." Felicia froze for a long moment. Through the iron bars, she could see rows of white chairs filling up, the flower-covered arch at the end of the red carpet where Edward would soon stand. She stepped back slightly, staying just out of the guard's direct line of sight, then sat down on the ground, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them. She waited. She would figure another way. She always did. Meanwhile, Thomas was searching for his phone. He patted every pocket, jacket, trousers, the small table by the window. Nothing. Edward's best friend since age 11, they'd been seated next to each other in school because both their last names started with B. Thomas was shorter than Edward, round-faced, easy to smile, and wearing a gray suit, tie already loosened even though it was barely 8:30 a.m. He stepped into the corridor and nearly bumped into a young kitchen worker carrying a tray. "Sorry," he said, steadying it. "No, sir, I'm sorry," the woman stammered. "Sir, I don't know if I should say anything, but there's a woman at the front gate. She's been there since before sunrise. The guards keep trying to send her away, but she keeps coming back." Thomas frowned. "What does she want?" "She says she needs to speak with Mr. Blackwood. She looks like she's been living on the streets for some time. The guards didn't take her seriously, but I heard her mention Greenfield University." Thomas froze. Greenfield University, the same place Edward had studied. The place where everything went wrong so many years ago. A cold, heavy feeling slid down his chest. "Where is she now?" he asked cautiously. "Still at the gate, sir. She won't leave." Thomas straightened his jacket. "Don't tell anyone. I'll handle this myself." He walked briskly down the corridor toward the front entrance. The cold weight in his chest grew heavier with each step. Outside, the morning sun was warm on his face. Staff hustled around him, carrying flowers, folding chairs, and boxes. Everyone was busy, oblivious to him. He reached the gate and looked through the iron bars. Felicia was sitting against the wall to the right, small and thin, knees pulled to her chest, head slightly bowed. Her plastic bag lay beside her, almost weightless. Thomas cleared his throat. She looked up. For a long moment, he just stared. He hadn't seen Felicia in 10 years. 10 years enough to change someone completely, enough that you might pass them on the street and feel nothing but vague unease. But Thomas remembered. Her laugh. The way she used to sit cross-legged on the grass outside the university library with 3 textbooks open at once. The way Edward had looked at her, like she was the most fascinating person in any room. He remembered that morning everything had fallen apart. Now, looking through the gate, he saw Felicia's eyes, same shape, same quiet intelligence, but the rest of her showed time and hardship. Cheeks thinner, skin dull, body folded inward from years of learning to take up as little space as possible. "Felicia," he whispered. Her expression shifted, surprise, relief, and a guarded caution. "Thomas," she said softly. They held each other's gaze across the bars for a long, heavy moment. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "Since before sunrise," she replied. Thomas looked toward the mansion, then back at her. His mind raced, Edward inside, dressing, Monica in her gown, 300 guests arriving soon, Edward, successful, composed, but somehow never complete. "I need to speak with him," Felicia said, quiet but urgent. "I know today is the worst possible day. I know how this looks, but Thomas, I have something he needs to see before the wedding happens. Please." Thomas studied her. Over the years, he had watched Edward build walls, lock himself away, choose safety over risk, choose Monica not with excitement but logic. And he had never fully believed the story about Felicia's betrayal. Something had always felt off, too neat, too perfect, too convenient. Until now. "Wait here," he said, then turned back toward the mansion. Getting Felicia inside was easier than he expected. He said nothing to anyone and simply opened a small side entrance, waving off the guard, whose look clearly said, "I'm the groom's best friend. I don't care." He led her quickly along the garden path, away from staff and preparations, keeping to the edge of a tall hedge. Felicia walked silently beside him, bare feet on smooth stone, careful, quiet, as if she had spent years practicing not being noticed. He brought her to a small sitting room at the back of the mansion. Family space, private, and used for events, 4 walls, a sofa, low table, window overlooking the side garden. "Sit," Thomas said gently. "I'll get you some water." He returned with a glass of water and a small plate of bread, taken quietly from the kitchen. He set them in front of her. She looked at the bread briefly, then at him. "Thank you," she said. "Eat," he said simply. "Then tell me everything." She did. Quietly, without stopping, hands folded in her lap. She described waking up 10 years ago in her boarding house to a stranger in her room, a man she didn't know, placed there while she slept. How Edward arrived minutes later, everything arranged like a stage play. How she was thrown out, her savings stolen, messages blocked, calls unanswered. How Monica played the role of the supportive friend perfectly, standing beside Edward and shaking her head whenever Felicia's name came up. She told him about the years after, the jobs she couldn't keep, the full shelters, the people who helped, the ones who didn't, the slow dismantling of her life until almost nothing remained. Thomas listened, silent. Face calm, hands tight on his knees. When she finished, the room held its quiet weight. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, his voice rough. "Felicia. I didn't know. I really didn't." "I know you didn't," she said. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because of this." She dug into her plastic bag and pulled out a small flash drive. She stared at it for a moment, then set it carefully on the table between them. 3 days ago, she began, I was outside a cafe on Carter Street. Monica and her mother were sitting by the window. I was going to walk away, like I always do. But something made me stop that day. I listened. Thomas's eyes stayed on the flash drive. They talked about everything, Felicia continued, voice low and calm, like she was speaking where no one could hear. The staged betrayal. The man they paid to be in my room. The boarding house owner who accepted the bribe. My money, gone. All of it. And they laughed about it, Thomas. Laughed. Over coffee. Thomas closed his eyes for just a second. There was a security camera above their table, Felicia said. After they left, I went inside. I found the waiter who served that section and asked if the camera recorded audio. He checked. And yes. She nodded at the flash drive. Everything's on here. Every word. Their voices are clear. Thomas picked up the flash drive, turning it over in his fingers slowly. Have you listened? He asked. 4 times, Felicia said. I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't. I've carried this alone for a long time. I had to be sure. Thomas stood and paced to the window, his back to her. Outside, cars were arriving. Voices, laughter, the string quartet warming up near the fountain. The wedding was moving forward. Less than 2 hours to go. He turned back to her. I have to show Edward. Felicia nodded slowly. I know it's going to. Thomas stopped. There was no way to say it cleanly. What he meant was, it's going to shatter him. Not because of Monica. Edward had never truly loved Monica. But he had spent 10 years believing a lie. 10 years building walls around himself. 10 years of careful, hollow safety, all on a foundation that was never real. Are you ready for what comes next? Thomas asked. I've been ready for 10 years, she said, calm and certain. Thomas found Edward in the dressing room on the 2nd floor. Edward stood at the mirror, adjusting his tie for the 4th or 5th time. Jacket on. Shoes on. Fully dressed, and yet still fiddling with the tie, restless. Thomas closed the door behind him. I need to show you something. Edward glanced in the mirror. The ceremony starts in less than 2 hours. Thomas, I know. Whatever it is, it. Sit, Thomas said quietly, firmly, the kind of quiet that makes a person stop. Edward turned slowly, really looked at him. No jokes. No lightness. Just seriousness. Edward sat. Thomas pulled a chair across from him, set the flash drive on the small table, and placed his phone beside it. He had already connected the two and loaded the audio file while Felicia waited downstairs. Before I play this, Thomas said, I need you to answer one thing honestly. Edward stayed silent. Go ahead, his eyes said. Do you remember Felicia? The name hit the room like a stone. Edward's face didn't change, at least, not outwardly. But something shifted behind his eyes, a door slightly opening that was usually locked. Why are you asking that? He said, calm but guarded. Because she's here. A long pause. What do you mean she's here? She's downstairs, in the back sitting room, Thomas said, eyes on him. She's been at the gate since before sunrise. Walked across the city to get here. Barefoot. Edward stood, then sat, then stood again. He walked to the window, one hand pressed against the frame. Outside, the garden filled with guests. Chairs nearly full. Everything white and bright. 300 people ready to watch Edward Blackwood begin a new chapter. She betrayed me, Edward said, voice low. Did she? Thomas asked carefully. Edward, I saw it. But what you saw, what was arranged for you to see, it wasn't real. Just listen. He pressed play. The recording was short. Maybe 4 minutes. Just long enough. The audio quality was crisp. The cafe had installed new cameras with audio only 3 months prior, a minor detail at the time, now crucial. Background noise, cups clinking, faint conversation, soft music. And over it, two voices Edward knew too well. Monica first, light, amused. She actually came back to the city. Can you believe it? Then Margaret, dry and calm, with a voice that betrayed nothing. It doesn't matter. There's nothing she can do. Nothing she can prove. She looked terrible, Monica said, a small smile in her voice. I saw her outside that restaurant on Wednesday. She didn't notice me. She's been living on the streets for years, by the look of it. Good, Margaret said simply. A brief pause, the faint sound of a cup being set down. Then Monica, almost fondly, do you remember how easy it was? We didn't even have to try that hard. The boarding house owner was cheap, Margaret replied. $2,000. Didn't ask a single question. The man we hired? Even cheaper. And she slept right through it. Monica laughed softly. And Edward, he was so ready to believe the worst. That's the thing about people who love too much. One little push, and everything collapses. That was the point, Margaret said. I knew exactly how to push him. Her money was the cleanest part, Monica continued. Once she had nothing, there was nowhere to go. No way to fight back. No way to reach him. No family with resources, no connections, nothing. Margaret's voice was flat, like stating a fact. Without resources, a person simply disappears. That's how the world works. And now, Monica said, her voice lifting with satisfaction, in 3 days, I'll be Mrs. Blackwood. Yes, Margaret agreed. You are. The recording ended. Silence filled the room. Thomas glanced at Edward. Edward hadn't moved in the last 2 minutes of the recording. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes stared at a spot on the floor. His face was a maze of emotions, grief, disbelief, rage, and something quieter, something broken trying to hold itself together. Edward, Thomas said softly. Nothing. Edward. A slow, shuddering breath escaped Edward, like air trapped too long. He pressed a hand over his eyes. Thomas said nothing. Some moments don't need words. He just stayed near, steady, present. After a while, Edward lowered his hand. His eyes were dry but red, and the careful, composed distance he always wore was gone. For the first time in years, he looked exposed, unguarded. She was telling the truth, he whispered. She was always telling the truth. Yes, Thomas said. Edward closed his eyes. And I didn't believe her. I didn't even, he stopped. A muscle worked in his jaw. I didn't even let her speak. I was so sure, so certain I knew what I'd seen, and his voice cracked, and he pressed his lips together. Thomas waited silently. Where is she? Edward asked after a moment. Downstairs, the back sitting room, Thomas said. Edward nodded slowly, staring at the floor for a few more seconds before standing. He straightened his jacket and took a deep, steadying breath. Thomas watched him and thought, this is the bravest thing I've ever seen him do. Not a boardroom. Not a deal. This, facing the hardest truth head-on. Come with me, Edward said quietly. Thomas stood and followed. The back sitting room was exactly as Thomas had left it. Felicia sat on the sofa. She had eaten the bread. The glass was empty. Hands folded in her lap, eyes resting on the window. When the door opened, she turned. Edward stepped in. They looked at each other. 10 years had passed. Long enough to change almost everything, yet some things don't change, the way a person carries themselves, the calm stillness, the unique shape of something in their eyes that time cannot erase. He knew her. Despite the years, the worn clothes, and the hardships etched on her face, he knew her. Like recognizing a song you haven't heard in a decade, or a childhood place even after it's changed. Edward took 2 steps forward, then stopped as if his legs had forgotten how to move. Felicia watched. She hadn't stood. She had imagined this moment countless times, angry, cold, ready with words, but now, nothing mattered except the quiet reality. "Felicia," Edward said, low and rough. "Hello, Edward," she replied. He crossed the room in 3 steps, knelt in front of her in his wedding suit, and bowed his head. "I'm sorry," he said. Broken. Simple. Honest. "I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have believed you. I should have." He stopped. Shoulders slumped. "I failed you. In every way. I failed you. And I'm so sorry." The room was still. Felicia looked at the top of his bowed head. She thought of the years, the cold nights, the moments she wanted to give up but didn't. All the time she'd hoped the truth would come out. She reached out and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "I forgive you," she said softly. "I forgave you a long time ago. It wasn't your fault. We were both deceived." He looked up. Eyes wet. She held his gaze. For a brief moment, the 10 years vanished. Beneath the pain, the lies, and the lost time, the bond that had always existed between them quietly remained. Thomas, standing near the door, blinked hard several times. No one spoke. For now, none of them needed to. Edward remained kneeling, Felicia's hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The room felt suspended in that moment, the weight of 10 lost years, the release of long-hidden truths, the strange, fragile intimacy of 2 people reconnecting on the most unexpected morning. Outside the window, a string quartet began to play. The soft, elegant melody, typical for grand weddings, floated through the glass, unaware of the storm of emotions inside. Edward rose slowly, smoothing his jacket once more, a habit he had repeated countless times before. But this time, it wasn't a mask. It was preparation for facing something real. He looked at Felicia. She returned his gaze. "What will you do?" she asked. Her voice was steady, calm, without pressure. She wasn't demanding, she simply wanted to know, ready for any answer he gave. That, Edward thought, had always been her. "I'm going to see this through," he said softly. Felicia gave a single, quiet nod. Thomas stepped forward from the doorway. "The ceremony starts in just over an hour. 300 guests are in the garden, Edward. Monica is upstairs in her gown, Margaret." "I know," Edward said. "I just need you to understand what walking out there means." "I understand," Thomas said, studying him carefully, then nodded, a slow gesture of complete trust. "All right. Whatever happens, I'm with you." Edward turned back to Felicia. "Stay here. Don't leave until Thomas comes for you. Can you do that?" "I've waited 10 years, she said firmly. "1 more hour isn't a problem." Edward didn't return to the upstairs suite. He walked through the mansion's quiet back corridors, past the bustling kitchen staff, past the small chapel used for private prayer, past the portrait of his father, a tall, serious man in a dark suit, like Edward, but with softer eyes. He paused, taking in the image. His father had always believed in honesty, especially when it was hard, and that character mattered more than any other. Edward let the thought linger briefly before moving on. He stepped into the garden. Sunlight bathed the white flowers, making them glow. 300 guests turned to look at him, murmurs rising softly. The string quartet shifted to the processional. Everything was perfect, pristine, and carefully arranged. Edward's face remained calm, his steps steady. Nobody could see the stone within him, the recording playing in his mind, Felicia's voice, the 10 lost years, his father's eyes. He carried it silently as he reached the flower arch, taking his place beneath it. Thomas, at his side, gave him a brief sideways glance. Edward nodded almost imperceptibly. The music changed. Monica appeared at the far end of the carpet. Gasps of admiration rippled through the crowd as she walked forward, bouquet in hand, head held high, eyes fixed on Edward. Her gown sparkled in the sun, scattering light as though she carried her own glow. Margaret sat in the front row, composed and satisfied, savoring the success of her long-laid plan. Monica reached the altar, smiled confidently at Edward, and the priest began. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Edward James Blackwood and Monica Claire Adams in holy matrimony." The garden held its breath as he spoke on commitment, partnership, and the weight of choosing one person above all others. Edward remained still, hands at his sides, eyes forward. Monica's practiced smile didn't falter, but she noticed something subtle, something slightly off, but dismissed it as nerves. Finally, the priest turned to her. "Monica Claire Adams, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said, clearly and confidently, her voice carrying through the garden. Warmth spread through the crowd. "And Edward James Blackwood," the priest continued, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Edward paused. He looked at Monica, carefully, quietly. Then, in a voice steady and clear, he said, "No. I don't." For 1 second, there was silence. Then the garden erupted. 300 shocked voices reacted simultaneously, programs dropped, whispers of disbelief swept the rows. Monica froze, her bouquet clenched, her practiced composure shaken. "Edward," she said, her voice tight and low. "What are you doing?" He ignored her and addressed the crowd instead. "I apologize to all of you for what you are about to witness. I know you came here expecting a wedding. I know this isn't what anyone expected, but there's something that has to happen today, something that cannot wait. I ask that you please stay in your seats." He glanced toward the garden's side entrance, the small gate tucked into the hedge leading back toward the house. He nodded. Thomas had slipped inside 10 minutes before the ceremony. Now he appeared at the side gate with Felicia at his side. She wore a simple pair of flats someone had handed her without question. A staff member had brought her water and a clean cloth for her face and hands. Beyond that, she was unchanged, worn clothes, slight frame, cautious movements. She stepped through the gate and into the garden, and the murmurs from the crowd shifted. Confusion gave way to unease. Whispers rippled through the rows. People craned their necks to see. A homeless woman was walking across the red carpet at Edward Blackwood's wedding, and nobody could process what they were witnessing. Monica's gaze locked on Felicia instantly. A fleeting shadow crossed her expression before she masked it. Margaret in the front row went rigid. Felicia stopped beside Edward. She didn't glance at the crowd, only at him, and for a single heartbeat, it was as if the 300 guests, the music, and the flowers ceased to exist. Edward turned to the priest. "I'm not marrying Monica Adams today," he said. Plainly, without flourish, stating a fact. Then he faced the crowd again. "But before I explain anything else, you need to hear something." He gestured toward the back of the garden, where a large screen had been set up. Thomas, standing by the equipment, pressed play. Monica's voice came first. She actually came back to the city. "Can you believe that?" Then Margaret, "It doesn't matter. She can't do anything. She can't prove a thing. She looked terrible. I saw her outside the restaurant on Wednesday. She hasn't had a home in years." "Good." Every guest heard it clearly. Monica's face drained of color, the kind that comes not from being caught, but from recognition. She turned toward the speakers, hopeful that the sound might be false. "Do you remember how easy it was? We didn't even need to try. The boarding house owner was cheap, $2,000, no questions asked. The man we hired? Even cheaper. She slept through it. And Edward, he was ready to believe the worst. That's the thing about people who love too much, one push, and everything collapses. That was the point. I knew exactly how to push him. Once she had nothing, she had nowhere to turn, no way to fight back. Without resources, she disappears. That's how the world works. And in 3 days, I'm going to be Mrs. Blackwood." "Yes, you are," Margaret added, flatly. The recording ended. Silence fell over the garden. Monica moved first. That's not real. That's edited. AI, you can make anyone say anything now, she said, voice sharp and urgent. Monica, Edward said quietly, and something in the tone froze her. This is made up by her because she wants. Monica. Because she wants attention or money, or she's unstable. Someone should check where it came from. Monica, Edward repeated, and his calm authority made her falter. I recognize your voice, he said simply. I've heard it every day for 4 years. Monica's eyes darted to the crowd, 300 faces staring back. People she had known for years. Contacts, friends, colleagues. Their expressions had changed. They were no longer admiring, no longer smiling. The warmth had gone. This isn't fair, she shouted, cracking for the first time. I've done nothing wrong. I've earned this. I've worked for this. You took everything from her, Edward said, voice low and steady. He looked at Felicia, and then everyone did. The thin, barefoot woman standing quietly on the red carpet, hands at her sides, emanated something undeniable. And in that instant, the garden shifted. Tears appeared in the 4th row, then another, then a man further back swallowed hard. Margaret sat still, composed, unflinching, her control more damning than anything else in the room. Monica searched for guidance in her mother's eyes. None came. Margaret's gaze remained fixed straight ahead, untouched. Monica was left alone. She turned back to the crowd, opened her mouth, and then stopped. The faces before her had changed. The warmth, the admiration, the soft smiles, all withdrawn, replaced with quiet, deliberate distance. The tide of attention had receded completely. Monica Adams, who had spent her life mastering influence, felt it leave in an instant. She set her bouquet carefully on the small table next to the priest and began walking back down the aisle alone, her steps deliberate, her chin still high, but her power evaporated. She did not look at Felicia as she passed. She walked through the garden's main gate and disappeared from view. A moment later, Margaret slowly rose from her seat in the front row. She carefully smoothed the front of her cream-colored dress with both hands. Without looking at anyone in particular, she turned and walked in the same direction her daughter had gone. Her posture stayed straight and composed, moving at an unhurried pace, as if she had simply chosen to leave early. The entire garden watched them go in silence. The priest, to his credit, cleared his throat gently and turned his attention to Edward. Edward was still standing beneath the flower arch. He hadn't moved during any of it. His hands rested at his sides as he looked at the empty space where Monica had been standing. Then he turned toward Felicia. Felicia was already looking at him. She looked just like she had earlier in the sitting room, calm, steady, and completely genuine. She hadn't watched Monica leave. She hadn't turned to the crowd. She had simply stayed where she was, waiting quietly, the same patient way she had waited for years. A patience that had cost her more than anyone else in that garden could truly understand. Edward stepped toward her. 2 careful steps. I told you I was going to finish this, he said softly, quietly enough that only she could hear him. But there's something else I need to say. Felicia said nothing. She simply waited. I lost 10 years, Edward said. I know I can't give those back. I know saying sorry again doesn't undo what those years took from you. I'm not asking you to forget any of it. He paused briefly before continuing. But I am asking you for a chance. Not today. I know today has already been too much. Just a chance. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready. Felicia studied him for a long moment. Behind him, 300 guests sat in complete silence. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt as if the entire garden understood that something fragile and important was happening, and nobody wanted to break the moment. The corner of Felicia's mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, something quieter than that. Something that had been hidden away for a long time and was only now carefully finding its way back. You always talked too much when you were nervous, she said gently. Edward let out a short, surprised laugh. It was real and spontaneous, the kind of laugh he hadn't made in a very long time. Thomas, standing off to the side, covered his mouth with his hand and glanced up toward the sky. Edward turned and faced the crowd again. He looked out at the 300 people sitting before him. Some still had tears in their eyes. Others looked stunned. Many simply watched quietly, moved by what they had just seen. "I owe all of you an explanation," he said. "And I owe this woman far more than that." He looked at Felicia standing beside him. "Her name is Felicia. 10 years ago, she was the most intelligent, kindest, and most genuine person I had ever known. She was also the person I loved more than anyone else in my life." He paused for a moment. "She was taken away from me through lies and cruelty, and I was too proud and too blind to question what I thought I had seen." The garden remained silent as he continued. "She spent 10 years living on the streets of this city because of what was done to her. While I was building my life, she lost everything. She had no money, no support, and no one who believed her." His voice stayed steady, though emotion sat heavily beneath it. "And yet she came here today not to ask for anything. Not for revenge. She came simply because she believed the truth deserved to be heard." He looked at her again. "That's the kind of person she is. That's the person she has always been." The woman sitting in the 4th row had begun crying again. She had stopped trying to hide it. Near the back of the garden, a man started clapping. Then another person joined. Then 3 more. Within seconds the sound spread across the entire garden until all 300 guests were applauding. It wasn't the loud celebration of a party. It was slower, deeper, an applause filled with understanding. The kind that said, "We see what happened to you, and you deserved better." Felicia stood there on the red carpet as 300 people applauded for her. She looked forward, and for the first time that morning, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't try to hide them. She simply let them fall and stood tall while they did. She had earned every one of them. Thomas walked over and stood quietly beside her on one side. Edward stood on the other. In the weeks that followed, many things changed. The recordings spread quickly, the way things do in a world where information travels faster than morning sunlight. By the evening of the wedding day, thousands had already heard it. By the next morning, hundreds of thousands more. Margaret Adams soon discovered that the powerful network she had spent decades building was not as loyal as she once believed. Phone calls she made went unanswered. Invitations she sent were politely declined. The world she had carefully constructed began to fall apart piece by piece. Monica left the city. No one publicly said where she went, and eventually, no one asked. Edward kept his promise and moved slowly. The first thing he did was find Felicia a proper place to live, a clean, quiet apartment in a good part of the city. Thomas helped arrange everything, and Edward made sure there were no conditions attached. He told her the apartment was hers no matter what. He also created a small fund to help cover whatever she needed while rebuilding her life. He made it clear that it wasn't charity. It was a debt being repaid, because that's exactly what it was. Felicia accepted it with the same calm dignity she carried everywhere. She didn't make it easy for him to feel forgiven too quickly, and Edward never asked her to. Instead, he simply showed up, quietly, consistently, without pressure, and let time do what only time can do. 3 weeks after the wedding, they met for coffee for the first time. It was at a small cafe on the opposite side of the city from Carter Street. They talked for 2 hours about ordinary things, books, the city, a new movie that had just been released, and a news story they had both read. Near the end of the conversation, Felicia laughed at something Edward said. A real laugh. Easy and natural. Edward thought it was the best sound he had heard in 10 years. He didn't tell her that. Not yet. But Thomas, who had insisted on sitting 2 tables away in case his friend needed support, noticed the expression on Edward's face the moment it happened. Thomas quietly paid his bill, stood up, and left the cafe with a wide smile that nobody else saw. 6 months later, on a quiet Saturday morning with no guests, no flowers, And no red carpet. Edward Blackwood and Felicia sat together on a bench in a small park near her apartment. Edward hadn't planned what he was about to say. Or maybe he had been planning it for 10 years without realizing it. "I meant what I said at the wedding," he told her. "I'm not asking you to forget anything. I'm not asking you to rush anything." He looked out across the park, the trees, the walking path, people enjoying a simple Saturday morning with their dogs and children. "I'm just asking if you'll let me try properly, the way I should have tried a long time ago." Felicia stayed quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "You know, I used to believe that if the truth ever came out, if someone finally believed me, that would be enough." She looked down at her hands resting in her lap. The same hands that had once held textbooks. Hands that had once become rough from hard years. Now slowly returning to something in between. "But when the truth finally came out," she said softly, "I realized it wasn't quite enough on its own." Edward looked at her. "What else did you need?" he asked. Felicia lifted her eyes to meet his. That same quiet change appeared in her expression again, the one that had first shown itself on the red carpet and had been growing ever since. "This," she said simply. The park remained calm and ordinary. No crowd. No cameras. No flowers. Just a peaceful Saturday morning. Edward reached over and gently took her hand. She let him. And that was enough. More than enough. In fact, it was everything. Sometimes the truth takes 10 years to arrive. But it always arrives eventually. And when it finally does, walking through the gate tired, barefoot, but still standing, the only thing left to do is open the door. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you took from it. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in the next video.